Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are focusing our lens on a writer who basically believed the only way to get to the truth was to ditch objectivity completely. Hunter S. Thompson.
That's right.
This is our deep dive into the American journalist, the author, who really transformed himself, didn't he? From, a journeyman writer into this huge literary phenomenon. His career ran from the late 50s right up until he died in 2005.
Yeah, and Thompson, he's really more than just a writer, isn't he? He's like an explosion in the history of reporting. He often gets grouped with those pioneers of the new journalism movement.
Right, the 60s and 70s crew.
Exactly. People like Gay Talese, Truman Capote, Norman Mailer, Joan Didion, Tom Wolfe, they all started using, novelistic techniques, dialogue, getting really deep into the story in ways that, newspapers just hadn't done before. It was all very dry, very objective back then.
New journalism itself was a huge shift, wasn't it? Treating factual reporting like it could be high literature. But Thompson, he didn't just join that movement, he sort of detonated it from within.
Totally. He replaced that idea of the neutral, detached reporter with this figure he called the raving beast.
And that really brings us to our mission today, doesn't it? We want to unpack that journey. How did he get from standard journalism, relatively speaking, to creating this massive Gonzo myth?
Exactly. That's what we're digging into. We're looking at how his writing style evolved, that iconic style. We'll trace his pretty ferocious political activism, too. And maybe most importantly, analyze that constant tension in his life.
Yeah.
The blurring line, which eventually just got erased, between Hunter S. Thompson the man and his chaotic alter ego, Roald Duke.
Okay, and right at the heart of all this, you have to talk about Gonzo journalism. So if new journalism meant getting closer, getting more literary, what was Gonzo?
Gonzo it's radical subjectivity cranked up to 11. If you think about new journalism, say, Tom Wolfe, right? He was all about being the meticulous fly on the wall, observing, documenting, reconstructing things with incredible detail, like a novelist.
Okay.
Thompson, though, he specialized in being, as he put it, the fly in the ointment. The Gonzo journalist doesn't just watch the chaos unfold. They dive right into the middle of it. They become a central participant, often fueling the story through, their own chemical intake, their emotional state, their deliberate interference, frankly.
So the writer isn't just shaping the story anymore. The writer is the story.
Precisely. The whole idea behind Gonzo is that you can only truly understand a really chaotic situation by embracing that chaos completely. And Thompson's work, it defined this, especially those two big ones that sort of bookend his peak Gonzo period, Hell's Angels in '67.
Which showed how far he'd go, right? Risking his own safety.
Absolutely. Total immersion. And then, of course, the big one, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas in 1972. That's the book that really codified the style, solidified the whole myth.
Okay, let's unpack that then. How did Thompson the journalist, the guy we know was studying Fitzgerald's sentence structure, how did he morph into this iconoclast, this Roald Duke figure? Let's start back in Louisville, Kentucky, where the chaos began, maybe? #2 to 5. The formative years and the apprenticeship of chaos.
Well, he was born there in 1937. Came from a middle-class family, initially. His father, Jack Thompson, was a public insurance adjuster, a World War I veteran. So a pretty solid conventional background to start with.
But that stability didn't last long, did it? The sources really highlight how his father's death affected him. Thompson was only 14.
Yeah, his father passed away at 58 from myasthenia gravis. It's a neuromuscular disease. And that loss, you can see how it just fractured the stability of his youth. His mother, Virginia, she was the head librarian at the Louisville Free Public Library. And the sources mentioned she became a, quote, heavy drinker after her husband died.
So you have this picture of a stable kid suddenly thrown into instability. He has to grow up fast, maybe looks for structure elsewhere.
And then immediately, dramatically rejects that structure. Yeah, that pattern seems to define his whole early relationship with authority, doesn't it?
You see it right away with his education. He went to Louisville Male High School, and, despite everything that came later, he was actually quite literary. He was in the Athenaeum Literary Association, which was apparently quite elite.
But that didn't end well either.
No, it ended pretty violently in 1955.
Yeah, this was a huge turning point. He got kicked out of the Athenaeum for criminal activity. Specifically, he was charged as an accessory to robbery. He was in the getaway car.
Right.
Got a 60-day sentence. Served about 31 days in the county jail. And that conviction meant he couldn't graduate high school. You can't really overstate how much that first real run-in with the legal system must have fueled his later, absolute contempt for the establishment.
And losing those academic credentials, that directly pushes him towards his next big institution, the military.
Yeah.
He enlists in the Air Force right after getting out of jail. Served from 55 to 58?
And even there, inside the strict military structure, the chaos, it finds him, or he finds it. He lands his first proper writing gig by basically lying about his experience. Bluffed his way into being the sports editor for the Command Courier newspaper at Eglin Air Force Base. Just made up his qualifications.
Amazing. And the Air Force cottoned on pretty quickly, it seems, based on his discharge papers.
Oh, yeah. They recommended him for an early honorable discharge. And the reasons are just pure Thompson. Because he, quote, will not be guided by policy.
Okay.
And even better, his, quote, rebel and superior attitude seems to rub off on other airmen. It's like they saw the future coming. That document basically predicts his entire career as this radical troublemaker.
So after the military, does he settle down, find a steady job?
And really, the pattern continues. He gets a job as a copy boy for Time magazine in New York. Fired. Insubordination.
Of course.
Then he lands a reporting job at the Middletown Daily Record in New York State. Fired again. This time for damaging a candy machine during an argument.
A candy machine?
Yeah, and then arguing with a local advertiser who paid the bills. He just couldn't hold down a conventional job.
But, and this is crucial, isn't it? During all this chaos, this getting fired, he's actually building the foundations. We focus on the drugs and the drama later, but Gonzo journalism doesn't come from nowhere. It's built on serious literary craft. You mentioned he was typing out Fitzgerald and Hemingway.
Yes, this is so important and often gets overlooked. While he was at Time, getting fired, he was literally retyping pages from The Great Gatsby and A Farewell to Arms.
Why? Just to feel it.
Exactly. He wasn't just reading them. He was physically copying the prose to absorb their rhythms, their sentence structures. Fitzgerald, you could argue, taught him about that big, sweeping, sort of melancholic narrative you need to tackle something like the failure of the American dream, which becomes central to Fear and Loathing.
And Hemingway?
Hemingway taught him the opposite, maybe. Economy, precision, using those hard, concrete details, which, ironically, Thompson would later use brilliantly to anchor his wildest, most subjective flights of fancy.
So it's this weird apprenticeship, learning grand narrative structure from one and clipped precision from the other.
A real mix.
Yeah.
And all this time, he's moving around constantly, right?
Yeah.
Gathering experiences, avoiding being pinned down. He goes to San Juan, Puerto Rico in 1960 for a magazine job that folds almost immediately. He ends up stringing for different papers.
Then California.
Then, 1961, Big Sur. Works for about 8 months as a security guard and caretaker at a place called Slate's Hot Springs. This was just before it became the famous Eastland Institute. It was a real Beat Generation hangout. Henry Miller lived nearby. Thompson's soaking up that whole bohemian counterculture vibe.
And he starts getting published a bit.
Yeah, his first published fiction, a story called Burial at Sea, appears in Rogue magazine around this time. And then there's that classic anecdote that shows his unique blend of tribute and sheer audacity. The 1964 trip to Ketchum, Idaho.
To Hemingway's place.
Exactly. He went there supposedly to write about Hemingway's suicide. And while he's there, as this sort of morbid souvenir, or maybe it was an act of aggressive homage to the writer he'd studied so intensely, he steals a pair of elk antlers right off the wall above the front door of Hemingway's cabin.
Wow. He didn't just write about his hero's death. He took a physical piece of the legacy.
Pretty much sums him up, doesn't it? That kind of appropriation. But the real breakthrough, the first proper deep dive that set the course for his career, that was the Hells Angels.
Right. The nation commissions him in 65.
Yeah, to write about the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. And this is where the immersion really kicks in. He doesn't just interview them politely. He lives with them, rides with them for a whole year. He's living near Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, literally across the street from the Grateful Dead's house, right in the thick of the emerging counterculture.
And that level of getting inside must have fundamentally changed how he saw journalism. But the sources say the relationship didn't end well.
No, it was built on a kind of shaky truce, wasn't it? Mutual exploitation, maybe. The biker started feeling like he was going to make a fortune off them and demanded a cut of the book profits.
And it got violent.
It's extremely violent. The whole thing ended with Thompson getting what he called a savage beating, basically a stomping. It happened when he apparently tried to step in and stop a biker from beating his dog and then his wife or girlfriend.
So his commitment to the story ended when his own, maybe warped moral code clashed directly with his subjects. He didn't just report the violence, he experienced it.
Yeah, it confirmed the risks of that extreme immersion. But the book that came out of it, Hell's Angels, published in 1967, was a huge success, critically and commercially. The New York Times loved it, called it angry, knowledgeable, fascinating, and excitedly written, said the prose, crackles like motorcycle exhaust.
So he'd proven he could deliver this immersive, high-stakes journalism. But the experience itself, the beating, maybe convinced him that the reporter couldn't pretend to be separate anymore. Their perspective had to be central. #TAC3, the peak Gonzo years, 1970, 1973.
Exactly. And the money from Hell's Angels, especially the paperback rights, that's what allowed him to buy Owl Farm, his place in Woody Creek, Colorado, that famous fortified compound.
His base of operations.
Right. And moving there coincided with this real acceleration in his political views. The late 60s, the chaos of that era, really radicalized him.
The 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago seems key here. He was there, saw the police riots, the clashes with protesters.
Oh, absolutely. He claimed that experience fundamentally changed how he saw authority, politics, everything. He put it very bluntly. I went to the Democratic Convention as a journalist, he said, and returned a raving beast.
The idea of being impartial just seemed ridiculous after that.
Impossible, yeah. The system to him was clearly rigged, violent, and he felt only an equally beastly response in journalism could actually capture that reality.
Which leads us straight into 1970 and his run for sheriff of Pitkin County, Colorado. The Freak Power campaign. This wasn't just a stunt, was it? It was serious political theater.
Totally serious, yeah. It was a genuine attempt to take power locally and expose the hypocrisy he saw in Aspen, the gentrification, the establishment, and the platform itself was, well, it was pure Thompson.
What were some of the planks?
Okay, so you had drug decriminalization, but only for personal use, not trafficking, which was incredibly progressive for 1970. Then there were these really specific, almost bizarre, local ideas.
Yeah.
Tear up the paved streets in Aspen and replace them with grassy pedestrian malls.
Seriously?
Yeah. Ban tall buildings that block the mountain views. Disarm the police force, give them mace instead of guns.
Wow.
And the kicker, rename Aspen Fat City to actively discourage developers and, unwanted wealth from coming in. It was this amazing fusion of counterculture ideals with really pragmatic, if radical, local policy.
And he played the image game brilliantly too, didn't he? The bald head.
Oh, classic Gonzo move. He shaved his head completely bald white so he could constantly refer to the Republican incumbent who had a traditional crew cut as my long-haired opponent.
Yeah.
Just flipping the script, messing with expectations.
Did he come close to winning?
He actually won the vote within the city of Aspen itself, but lost the wider county vote. He later felt that the article he wrote about it for Rolling Stone, The Battle of Aspen, actually backfired. It gave the opposition too much notice, allowed them to mobilize against him.
So the campaign itself created the perfect storm for his style to really crystallize.
And the definition arrived almost immediately after, also in 1970. With the piece, The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved, published in a magazine called Scanlon's Monthly.
And the story behind this one is legendary, right? Deadline pressure.
Extreme deadline pressure. He was apparently completely blocked, couldn't write a conventional piece about the race. So, in total desperation, he just started tearing pages out of his notebook, raw notes, observations, fragments, and sent those to the editor.
And that desperation turned into innovation.
Completely. The finished article, it barely mentions the horse race. Instead, it's all about the scene around the race.
Yeah.
The grotesque, drunken revelry, the sheer decadence of the wealthy spectators. And he juxtaposes all that with the political background of the time, the Nixon bombing Cambodia, the Kent State shootings just happening.
Sounds like a lightning strike.
It was. Another journalist, Bill Cardoso, read it and immediately wrote to Thompson. He said, "This is it. This is pure Gonzo. If this is a start, keep rolling." And the name just stuck. It meant journalism that wasn't about objective facts, but about the reporter's internal reality, their psychic experience at the event.
And crucially, that piece also marked the beginning of his long collaboration with the illustrator Ralph Steadman.
Yes. Steadman's art was the perfect visual match for Thompson's prose, that wild, expressionistic, sometimes really savage style. He used lipstick, eyeliner, splattered ink. It just captured the manic energy, the visual chaos that Thompson was describing.
And that partnership leads directly into his most famous work, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which, incredibly, started as a tiny assignment.
Almost unbelievable, isn't it? Sports Illustrated asked him for a 250-word photo caption to go with pictures of the Mint 400 motorcycle race in the desert outside Vegas.
And he sent them.
He sent him 2,500 words of pure hallucinatory chaos. Sports Illustrated, unsurprisingly, aggressively rejected it.
I bet they did.
But Jan Wenner at Rolling Stone, he saw the genius in what Thompson called the jangled pages. He ran it in two parts, serialized it, And that book just exploded Thompson into the mainstream consciousness. It follows these 2 trips to Vegas with his lawyer, Oscar Zeta Acosta.
The basis for Dr. Gonzo.
Right, his 300-pound Samoan attorney. But underneath all the drug-fueled mayhem, the book's actually doing something quite serious, isn't it?
It's not just a drug memoir.
Not at all. It's Thompson wrestling with the failure of the whole 1960s counterculture dream. Vegas becomes this symbol of where that dream went to die, replaced by crass commercialism and, well, fear and loathing. He's searching for the high watermark of the 60s, realizing it's long gone. The New York Times got it, they called it, the best book yet written on the decade of dope.
But maybe his greatest journalistic achievement, using this Gonzo method, came right after that. Fear and Loathing on the campaign trail 72, taking on a presidential election.
Yeah, this was Winter's idea, really. The voting age had just been lowered to 18, and Rolling Stone wanted to, as Winter put it, politicize our generation. They wanted an inside account of the 72 election, something like those popular Making of the President books by Theodore H. White.
But Thompson delivered something completely different from White's respectful insider view.
Oh, totally different. Instead of White's careful, objective tone, Thompson gave them a narrator full of contempt, paranoia, and fueled by God knows what chemicals. The literary critic Morris Dickstein had a great line about it. He said Thompson had learned to approximate the effect of mind-blasting drugs in his prose style. The writing itself felt like the frantic, wired energy of the campaign.
And this is where we get that famous description of the book, right? The ultimate Gonzo paradox.
Exactly. Thompson covered the Democratic primaries. McGovern, Muskie, Humphrey, all vying to take on Nixon. And Frank Mankiewicz, who was George McGovern's campaign director, described Thompson's collected Rolling Stone dispatches as the most accurate and least factual account of the campaign.
Let's dig into that. Most accurate and least factual. How can it be both? He was making stuff up, wasn't he? Like the Muskie drug rumor.
He absolutely was. He floated this rumor that Ed Muskie, who was a leading Democratic contender at the time, was secretly addicted to ibogaine, this obscure psychedelic drug. There was zero evidence for it. It was a fabrication.
So why do it if it wasn't true?
Because, in Thompson's view, the factual reporting coming from the mainstream press was failing miserably to capture the real atmosphere of that campaign. The paranoia, the dirty tricks, the sheer desperation felt by those trying to stop Nixon. He felt the so-called objective truth that Muskie was probably a decent, if maybe slightly boring guy, was actually misleading. It didn't convey the emotional reality of politics in '72.
So the lie about ibogaine, bizarre as it was, somehow felt truer to the insane spirit of the times than the actual facts did.
That's a Gonzo argument, yeah. He believed that conventional facts, especially those presented by the establishment media, were often the biggest lies of all because they sanitized reality. Gonzo, with its strategic use of invention and hyperbole, was his antidote. It aimed for a deeper, visceral truth, even if it meant bending the literal facts.
It's an incredible tightrope walk, and that period, roughly 1970 to 73, it's just an explosion of creativity. But that kind of intensity, it can't last, can it? Let's talk about what happened next, the decline, when the persona started to take over. Hashtag Vi. The consequences of fame and the blurred persona.
Yeah, the years right after Campaign Trail 72, they mark a pretty clear downturn. A tragic one, really. His actual literary output, the new stuff, it just drops off a cliff. And pretty much everyone, friends, editors, the sources we have, they point to one major factor: his escalating drug use, particularly cocaine.
He started using cocaine around 1973.
Around then, yeah. And people close to him, like Jan Wenner, his editor at Rolling Stone, they noticed a devastating impact on his discipline, his ability to focus, his actual creativity.
Wenner said something quite stark about it, didn't he? About Africa.
He did. He said, after Africa, he just couldn't write. And Africa refers to that 1974 assignment Thompson had to cover the rumble in the jungle. The huge heavyweight fight in Zaire between Jordan Foreman and Muhammad Ali.
And what happened there?
Well, it's almost a perfect, sad illustration of how the Gonzo model collapsed on itself. The whole point of Gonzo is immersion, participation, right, being there. But Thompson, he got so messed up, so intoxicated back at his hotel, that he completely missed the fight itself.
He missed the rumble in the jungle.
Missed the whole thing and never filed a story. The persona, the lifestyle required to be Gonzo, combined with the drug dependency, it just overwhelmed his ability to actually do the journalism anymore. The chaos consumed the reporting.
And that wasn't an isolated incident, was it? Vietnam the next year.
Same pattern. 1975, Rolling Stone sends him to cover the fall of South Vietnam, an absolutely monumental historical event. And as Saigon is collapsing, Thompson, basically flees the country.
Freaked.
Refuses to file a proper dispatch. Another huge assignment, another failure to deliver.
Winter mentioned he sent something back.
Yeah, Winter later clarified Thompson did send an unfinished dispatch, but said he spent most of his time in Saigon completely obsessed with his own evacuation plans, not actually reporting on the fall of the city. The irony is just painful. His main souvenir from covering the end of the Vietnam War was apparently this custom-made brass door plaque he'd ordered for his hotel room.
What did it say?
Rolling Stone, Global Affairs Suite, Dr. Hunter S. Thompson. It's like the symbol of his importance, the artifact became more real, more tangible than the journalism itself.
And that plaque kind of perfectly symbolizes the whole problem, doesn't it? This persona he created, Raoul Duke, this wild, drug-addled, self-destructive journalist, it was now completely out there in the public mind. It was starting to overshadow the actual man, Hunter Thompson.
Oh, completely. He deliberately created Raoul Duke, but the creation definitely started running the show. Thompson himself knew it too. He talked about it quite openly in interviews.
What did he say?
There's a BBC interview from 1978 where he says, "I'm never sure which one people expect me to be. Very often, they conflict. I'm leading a normal life, and right alongside me there is this myth, and it is growing and mushrooming and getting more and more warped."
The public wanted the caricature, right? And the caricature needed constant fuel.
Which links back to the substance abuse. Wenner tried to help him, didn't he? Offered to pay for rehab.
He did. Winter was genuinely worried, both for Thompson as a friend and for his career, but Thompson refused the help.
Why? Did he think he didn't have a problem?
Worse than that, really. His reasoning was this kind of dark, artistic fatalism. He honestly seemed to believe that the drugs, the chaos, were essential to his talent. He said it was a key to his talent, and that without it, he'd just have the mind of an accountant. He saw the dysfunction not as a bug, but as a necessary feature of his genius. That's tragic. So heading into the 80s and 90s, the major new works dry up.
Pretty much. A lot of what got published in that era were collections of earlier pieces, compiled into those Gonzo Papers volumes, like The Great Shark Hunt or Songs of the Doomed. Good stuff, but mostly retrospective.
Did he attempt big new projects?
He did. He spent a lot of time researching a book about feminist pornography for Playboy, of all places. It was supposed to become a novel called The Night Manager, but it never got finished. He was still drawn to extreme subjects, but maybe the focus, the discipline to see a huge project through just wasn't there anymore.
He did have that newspaper column, though, for the San Francisco Examiner.
Yeah, a weekly media column. And his editor there had a fantastic description of Thompson's late period output. He said the column swung wildly between acid-soaked gibberish with a charm of its own and incisive political analysis of the highest order. You just never knew what you were going to get. The signal-to-noise ratio was unpredictable.
So let's circle back to the actual style of Gonzo writing. You mentioned he wasn't like the other new journalists, meticulously reconstructing scenes.
Right. He said he almost never tried to reconstruct things after the fact, unlike, say, Tom Wolfe or Gay Talese, who were obsessed with getting dialogue and timelines exactly right. Thompson's goal was different.
Tom Wolfe had a good take on it, didn't he?
Yeah, Wolfe described Thompson's style as part journalism and part personal memoir admixed with powers of wild invention and wilder rhetoric. It was this hybrid thing. Narrative reliability wasn't the point. Emotional impact, rhetorical velocity, that was the goal.
Which must have been an absolute nightmare for his editor.
Oh, you bet. Fact-checking Thompson. One editor called it a trip through a journalistic funhouse. They constantly had to figure out, okay, where does reality end and where does the riff, as they called it, begin?
So how did they publish anything under the banner of journalism? What stopped it from just being fiction?
This is the last really fascinating piece of the puzzle, the final paradox of his method. While the overall story, the sequence of events, might be completely embellished or even fabricated, the concrete physical details within that fabrication were often meticulously accurate. He was apparently a total stickler for numbers, for details like gross weight and model numbers, for lyrics and caliber.
So he'd get the make and model of the car exactly right, or the specific type of gun, or the lyrics to a song playing on the radio, even if the entire scene happening around those details was completely invented.
Exactly. He'd anchor these wild, sprawling, chemically fueled narratives to these little islands of hard, verifiable fact. It gives the whole thing this weird, unsettling feeling of authority, of journalistic credibility, even when you suspect it's mostly bullshit. It's a really clever, subversive technique. #V, political legacy, final days, and spectacle funeral.
And underpinning so much of that writing, especially the best stuff, was his politics, that fierce, lifelong iconoclasm.
Absolutely. And central to that, always, was Richard Nixon. Thompson's hatred for Nixon was just monumental. He saw Nixon as representing, quote, that dark, venal, and incurably violent side of the American character.
That obituary he wrote for Nixon in '94.
Oh, he was a crook. Published in Rolling Stone, still one of the most savage, vitriolic pieces of political writing you'll ever read in a mainstream publication. Just brutal.
But his politics weren't simple left-wing, were they? They were more complex, rooted in this deep sense of individual liberty, like his stance on guns.
That's a key point, and it confuses people who only see the druggy counterculture image. Thompson was a lifelong firearms enthusiast, owned a lot of guns, loved explosives, and he was a fierce defender of the Second Amendment.
He believed it was crucial against government power.
Exactly. He saw the right to bear arms as a fundamental check on state tyranny. This might surprise a lot of people. He was actually a member of the National Rifle Association, the NRA.
Wow. So how do you square that? The guy railing against the white power structure and hanging out with the counterculture, but also an NRA member?
I think it all stems from this bedrock distrust of any centralized authority, whether it's the government trying to take your guns, or the police conducting illegal searches, or corporations polluting. It was all part of the same oppressive system to him.
Which explains his work on the Fourth Amendment, too.
Precisely. His support for the Second Amendment came from the same place as his passion for the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable search and seizure. He even co-founded an organization, the Fourth Amendment Foundation, specifically to help people who had been victims of illegal searches or police abuse. He saw it all as connected. Protect yourself from the state.
And he put that belief into action later in his life, didn't he? With the Lizzle Almond case in Colorado?
Yes, that was a really significant late career intervention. Lizzle Almond was this woman in Colorado who got sentenced to life for felony murder, even though she wasn't even present when her accomplice shot a police officer. It's based on these really extreme accomplice liability laws.
And Thompson got involved.
He took up her cause passionately, wrote about it, organized public support, helped raise money for her legal defense. It showed he still had that power to mobilize people, to focus attention on injustice.
Did it work?
It did. Although Thompson died before the final ruling, her sentence was eventually overturned not long after his death. And many people directly credit the pressure and the spotlight he put on the case for that outcome.
So guns, privacy, and drugs, of course. He was always a huge advocate for legalization.
Oh, yeah. Served on the advisory board for NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, for over 30 years. And his argument wasn't just let people get high. It was pragmatic, anti-authority. He said legalize drugs across the board. He drew the comparison to alcohol prohibition.
Saying it just makes criminals rich.
Exactly. Criminalization, he argued, just empowers illegal markets and gives the state more power to interfere in people's lives.
You also see hints of other influences in his politics. Marxist ideas.
Yeah, he definitely criticized white power structures. He expressed real affection for the old radical labor union, the industrial workers of the world, the IWW or Wobblies. He even said he agreed with Karl Marx on certain things. It's this unique blend, isn't it? Hard left social critique mixed with this almost extreme right libertarian focus on individual freedom and distrust of the state. Very hard to pigeonhole.
And that skepticism never waned, did it? Even after 9/11?
Not at all. He was actually one of the first prominent voices to publicly express doubts about the official story of 9/11. He speculated in interviews that the U.S. government might have been involved somehow, though he admitted he didn't have concrete proof. For Thompson, the default setting was always deep suspicion of power, no matter what.
Living life at that pitch, with that level of intensity, paranoia, chemical intake, it takes a toll. His final years sound like they were marked by a real decline.
They were. He was dealing with chronic health problems, had a painful hip replacement. He often talked about feeling old, bored, told friends things like, this kid is getting old. There was a sense of obsolescence, maybe.
And his death itself, February 20th, 2005, age 67, self-inflicted gunshot wound at Owl Farm. The details are just bleak.
Incredibly bleak. His wife, Anita, who he'd married just a couple of years earlier, she was actually on the phone with him when it happened. She said later she heard him cock the gun, but thought it was the sound of his typewriter keys.
Oh, God.
And his grandson and daughter-in-law were apparently in the next room. They heard the shot, but thought it was just a book falling off a shelf. The sheer, terrible banality of the end is such a stark contrast to the spectacle of his life.
He left a note, didn't he? Football season is over.
Yeah. It's short, brutal, and gives a pretty clear window into his mindset. It read, no more games, No more bombs. No more walking. No more fun. No more swimming. 67. That is 17 years past 50. You are getting greedy. Act your old age. Relax. This won't hurt. It sounds like an artist just finally rejecting an existence that wasn't giving him the intensity, the fun he felt he needed.
But even in death, Thompson couldn't resist one last massive Gonzo performance, the funeral.
Oh, the funeral was pure Thompson, a $3 million spectacle, apparently paid for entirely by his friend Johnny Depp, who'd played him, well, Raoul Duke, on screen.
And the main event, the ashes.
His ashes were loaded into fireworks and fired from a giant cannon at a private ceremony at Owl Farm, August 20th, 2005.
And the cannon wasn't just any cannon, was it? It was on top of that tower.
Exactly. A 153-foot tower shaped like that iconic Gonzo symbol, the double-thumbed fist clutching a peyote button. The same symbol he'd used for his Freak Power Sheriff campaign back in 1970. It was literally building a monument to the persona.
So it wasn't just a funeral, it was a final piece of performance art.
Totally. Complete with fireworks, red, white, blue, and green, exploding to the soundtrack of Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky and Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man. And the guest list was pure Thompson, too. Politicians like Senators John Kerry and George McGovern rubbing shoulders with actors like Jack Nicholson and Bill Murray. It was the perfectly choreographed final act, transforming his suicide into spectacle, ensuring his last dispatch was pure 100% Gonzo.
And the legacy, it definitely lives on. People still talk about him, still read him.
Absolutely. Tom Wolfe, who was stylistically very different, still called Thompson the greatest American comic writer of the 20th century. And that Raoul Duke persona, it's echoed in characters like Uncle Duke in the Doonesbury comic strip or hunter-gatherers in the animated show The Venture Bros.
And there are scholarships now, too, right? In his name.
Yeah, his widow, Anita, set them up. One supports U.S. military veterans studying at Columbia University, which feels fitting given his own military background, and another helps journalism students at the University of Kentucky. So his legacy is also about supporting future writers, especially maybe those coming from unconventional paths, like Thompson himself did. #TagsEP. Outro and final thought for the listener.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into Hunter S. Thompson? For me, it really throws that central tension of his life into sharp relief. On one hand, you have this incredibly successful, revolutionary effort to make journalism subjective, artistic, that most accurate and least factual approach.
Yeah, right.
But on the other hand, there's the constant and ultimately, fatal struggle to keep any distance between the journalist doing the work and the extreme self-destructive persona he seemed to need to create that work.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Thompson's work, it really forces you to think about deep immersion, about skepticism towards authority. His legacy, maybe, is showing us that the reporter, their biases, their feelings, their own chaos, isn't just part of the story, it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
Especially when you're covering times like his of huge political and cultural upheaval. He basically turned the writer's perspective into a weapon.
Okay, so we'll leave you, our listener, with a final thought to chew on. We've talked about Thompson the iconoclast, the fierce defender of the Second Amendment gun rights, the co-founder of the Fourth Amendment Foundation fighting illegal searches. He had this deep, almost paranoid hatred of centralized power and surveillance.
Right. So
how would Hunter S. Thompson, the man who demanded absolute personal privacy and freedom from the state, how would he view our world today? This hyper-digitalized age with constant tracking, facial recognition, data harvesting, the balance between freedom, technology, and privacy now.
Yeah, that's a great question. Would the guy who stole Hemingway's antlers be out there championing encryption, waging war on big tech surveillance, seeing it as the ultimate big brother nightmare? Or would the sheer complexity and sort of overwhelming nature of modern digital control just paralyze the raving beast? Would he find himself unable to even file a dispatch on a world that's maybe become too weird, too controlled, even for Gonzo?
Something to think about as you navigate the modern noise. That's all for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.